cultural diversity, and it's been a big topic of conversation in our state, not much to my chagrin. Some of the negative things that have been said about that, especially in higher education. But tonight, as social workers, we know that this, having that awareness, having that, basis for understanding that not everybody is starting from the same place. Not everybody thinks the same. And it's when we meet people where they are, that means to understand that people come from diverse cultural backgrounds. And so when we talk about grief, it's very much a part of how people experience loss and mourning and grief in the world, and certainly in our communities. So this is an important part of our understanding of how we approach our helping profession. So according to the 2020 census, over 40% of US residents are members of an ethnic or cultural minority, and by 2050, that's going to exceed 50%. So with current projections, and if things keep going the way they are. And an article in the HuffPost said that Houston is one of the most culturally diverse cities in the United States, for a whole host of reasons. But so it's really important for us to be aware, and to know how that influences our work with clients and our work as people in the world. So here's sort of the standard definition of culture. It deals with the social heritage of a person, defined as the way of life of a society consisting of prescribed ways of behaving or shared norms of conduct, shared beliefs, values, and skills even. But there's also a broader definition of that, because culture can be applied to all of these different and many more different categories, geographic areas. I'm from the Mid-Atlantic, from Pennsylvania. And certainly when I moved to, well, first I moved to California, and then I moved to Texas. And you want to talk about culture shock. Very different culture here than there is in California or even Pennsylvania. So geographic areas, professions, certainly social work, we see ourselves as having a professional culture, a way that we approach life, a way that we approach our work, even within the mental health area. I've had lots of conversations with LCSWs who note the difference of approaches and language that we use, as opposed to maybe an LPC or an LMFT or something like that. So it applies to all these areas: developmental stages, socioeconomic status, LGBTQIA plus, religion and spirituality groups, institutions, companies, corporate culture, academia, all of those things, have a different culture, because culture influences your language. Maybe, just the words that you use to describe things. It can influence music and religion and dress, even corporate culture, or academic culture, or regional culture, influences dress and food. And we find that we identify ourselves by what cultures that we are affiliated with. And also problem solving and dealing with life circumstances, how we approach problem solving, how we approach difficult times in our lives. One thing to note here, because culture can involve so many different areas of life, one person can be a member of many different cultures, or at least more than one. So that's something to consider when we're working with clients as well. So here's some terms. We've heard this term bandied about a lot, cultural sensitivity. And basically what cultural sensitivity is you are aware that people have different values, beliefs, and norms, that they have different spiritual backgrounds. Basically, you're aware that people come from different points of view and people come from different experiences and regions and like it said, values, beliefs, etc. And that may seem to be sort of an obvious thing, but I know you have met people, as I have, that are blissfully or not so blissfully unaware or, willfully ignorant of the fact that not everybody is the same. And if somebody is different, that they are aberrant rather than just different. So cultural sensitivity is an awareness. And this is sort of the basic, the basic part of what we're talking about culture and working with diverse cultures is to have that sensitivity to say, yeah, I acknowledge and I am sensitive to the fact that not everybody came from the same place that I came from. And so while it may sound like a basic thing that everybody understands, there are a lot of people that don't. And so, just to start there, that's important. Then cultural competence takes that awareness and says, I want to learn more about these cultures that I encounter so that I can use that knowledge to engage and interact effectively with people that come from different backgrounds. So it's not just, yeah, I know about it, but I'm going to learn about it so that I can be more effective and just more of a, I think an enriched person in this world as well to know about other cultures and how to honor them and to connect with people. So that's been the language that we've used for a long time, cultural sensitivity then leading to cultural competence. And a few years ago, our code of ethics was changed to also incorporate the concept of cultural humility, which it has been around for quite a while in many different contexts of medical and mental health, and when dealing with people of other cultures, but of diverse cultures rather. But what it says is that this is a process. Cultural humility or working with other cultures is a process. And to assume that you can be competent in someone else's culture is sort of hubris. It's misguided. So what the concept of cultural humility is that you're constantly going to be reflecting on your own biases. You're going to constantly be looking to your own responses to others and constantly learning and being curious and trying to learn more, basically educate yourself and be more aware of other cultures and what their practices are and how to sensitively connect with them. So cultural humility encourages an interpersonal stance that is curious. And I love that word. I've loved that word because it doesn't just mean, learn or ask questions. It means I really want to know. I'm really curious about you and your culture and what values are important to you. So it's other oriented. It emphasizes interpersonal openness on your part, on the part of your clients, and intercultural variation and individuality to avoid stereotyping. It's a lifelong endeavor, as I said. It's not about behaviors governed by law. It's about behaviors and actions that improve your ability to effectively and authentically communicate and interact with people of diverse cultures. And as I said, it's in our code of ethics, which I'm very proud of. So what's the impact of cultural insensitivity, especially in grief work? You may, if you're not sensitive to others' culture, of their approach or their values or their language, you may misinterpret their reactions to something that you've said or to a situation that's happened. You may fail to offer the support that they need or that they would perceive to be as helpful, and you may offend that person and create a barrier to their receiving care and support. So being at bottom, sensitive to the differences and then working towards cultural humility is essential to providing care to our clients, to diverse cultures. So when we're talking about grief and loss, some of the major cultural considerations are how they perceive the loss, death, and dying. What are their beliefs? What are their perceptions of grief and mourning? Is it a public thing? Is it a private thing? Beliefs and accepted practices. How is it expressed? How are helpers and resources perceived and utilized? Is it something that, people from the outside are not welcome, or not, this is a very private matter, or, our community grieves together and we help each other, or, we bring food, or we wail together. What are the communication patterns and common rituals for mourning? So all of those things are influenced by culture. And as I said, people from different cultures, one person can be from many different cultures, depending on, where they are from, what culture they grew up in, as well as their profession, their sexuality, their age, all of those things come into play. So as we know, the important aspects of a helping relationship are building trust, respect, and then forming that relationship based on those. So religion and spirituality play a big part in grieving, and they are also a cultural consideration. What are the client's beliefs about death and dying? What are the client's beliefs about an afterlife, or the meaning of suffering, the meaning of death, the role of God as a supreme being, and the role of prayer as something. Does prayer change events? Does prayer provide comfort or connection or communication? All of those things are a consideration when you're dealing with somebody in a grief and loss situation context. Family involvement is important. The family may be defined in very different and unique ways. Sometimes a family is, mom, dad, kids. Sometimes a family is mom, kids, or dad, kids. Or sometimes a family is multi-generational, all under the same roof. Or even if they're not under the same roof, I've had meetings with hospice where we have the initial meeting and there are, children and grandchildren and parents, and, there's maybe 20 or 30 people in a room making decisions. So, and sometimes where it's just the patient and maybe a spouse. So family can be defined in many different ways. During the 1980s, when the AIDS epidemic took hold, a lot of families were formed by people who were supportive of people with AIDS or people with HIV. And they were, they were shunned by their own families because a lot of people were coming out for the first time when they found that they had this then fatal disease. And so their families of origin were abandoning them, for lack of a better word. And so they came together in different family units. And so sometimes that's how family units are formed and defined. So, and one thing to understand too about families and culture, and this is very important, maybe for the quiz, cultural norms can change from generation to generation. So if you are, for instance, a family of that migrated here from another country, the first generation may have a different culture than the next generation or the generation after that that becomes more acculturated to where the culture here in the United States. So you can't assume that, just because this person is, originally from another country or their family was, that they have the same cultural norms as that original generation. And as I mentioned in my example, sometimes there's a family-centered model for decision-making. So it's not just an individual, like the patient gets to decide, they have autonomy. It's in their culture, the whole family makes a decision. In some cultures, it's the adult son, the oldest son. So, that's an important consideration, especially when you're dealing with grieving families. I had, when I worked in hospice, I bring this up a lot. There was many times where first generation immigrants from Mexico did not want to identify a nursing home because that would signal to their parents that, or the loved one who was dying, that they had given up on them. And so they would not do that. However, if I could talk to somebody in the next generation or the generation after that, oftentimes they would say, I'll take care of it so that we know, that we have somebody to call. And so there was that difference in generation to generation, but also it was how decisions were made. So how do we give culturally responsive care? So the very first step, and this is, something that we learn from day one in social work school, is to know yourself. Know what your beliefs are, what your life experiences, what your values are, what your thoughts are around grief and loss, and what your biases might be towards other diverse cultures. So being aware, knowing yourself. And then the second step is for you to expand your knowledge, learn about other cultures, do some reading, asking questions, being curious. And so, like I said, ask questions and listen when people give the answers, and be attentive and ask more questions if it's appropriate. Explore what information might be available, on the internet or from different organizations, cultural societies, things like that. And sometimes identifying a cultural broker, because it's not always possible or sensitive to expect your client to be the one to educate you on their culture because they're dealing with their own stuff. So sometimes identifying a cultural broker, and who that is somebody who is not involved in what's going on, but is a part of that community. So it might be somebody that, a colleague who is from that cultural background. It might be somebody from, the Asian American Cultural Society, or it might be somebody that does that professionally. But it's somebody that you can go to and say, I've got some questions about this. And I want to know the right approach so that I can, give good care to this client. So that's a cultural broker, somebody that doesn't have skin in the game, but understands and is part of the culture that that is the same as or similar to your client. And based on the knowledge that you've gathered about diverse cultures, develop new strategies and or modify the skills that you have for meeting those needs. And again, it's an ongoing process. It's a lifelong process, and it's, to me, it's an exciting one because it means that you're always learning, you're always growing, and you're always, you know, finding out new things and connecting with people in a deeper and more meaningful way. And demonstrating respect, curiosity, and desire to work with diverse patients and their families, to develop a commitment to know others. So going out there with your, in your placements, in your agencies, in your job, saying, I'm open to, curious, and I desire to work with people in diverse community, from diverse communities. So grief, as we know and as we've learned, is very personal, and it's also a very cultural experience.